Welcome to the MAM Journals. Today I'll be talking about the F850 GS. I like to think that my videos are balanced and that I'm objective about bikes, but occasionally, just like everybody else, I can jump to conclusions. And when I picked this bike up, my mind did wander, well, is this just somehow going to be the smaller, lesser brother of the world famous 1250? If you've got an 850 and that comment's rankled with you, bear with me. I will of course be making some comparisons with my R1250 GS, but I'll be judging this bike on its own merits. Today I'll be going through the specifications of the bike, I'll be going on some GoPro, I'll be focusing on the road capability, and I'll explain a bit more about that when we get on the GoPro. And I'll be coming back and making some concluding remarks and comments. I would like to take this opportunity, of course, to thank North Oxford BMW for lending me the bike, and I hope that you enjoy the video. Okay, I said that I'd start with the specifications. There's quite a lot to go through, but I'm going to start with the engine. Okay, this is an 853cc. It's water cooled. BMW describe it as an inline 4-stroke, 2-cylinder. We sometimes think of them as parallel twins. It's got 4 valves per cylinder and 2 overhead cams. In terms of power, if you're thinking kilowatts, which is a lot of people do now, it's 70 kilowatts. I still think in brake horsepower, and that's 95 brake horsepower at 8250. And it also produces 92 newton meters of torque at 6250. They use this engine on quite a few of their bikes, not all of them they call 850s, and they just tune them up largely by throttle body size and ECU, i.e. the different mapping that they put into it. They're actually replacing this bike, and it's going to be replaced by the 900, but today I'm going to be focusing on this bike, the 850. Right, this frame is called a bridge type construction, and obviously steel, and the engine is effectively suspended from that, which is a well-established and proven design. Going to the front of the bike is fitted with 43mm upside down telescopic forks. That's got 204mm of travel. The reason I mention that is the specification of this bike tells me very clearly that it's a bike that is intended for dual purpose and can be used off-road, and some of the characteristics are leaning towards that. And in particular, this 21-inch wheel and skinny rim. It's a 2115 times 21 rim, and it's got a 1990 21 tyre on it. I did actually look at that when I first picked it up and thought, I hope the rain isn't too much in the road, but that characteristic is certainly an off-road sign of capability. In terms of discs and brakes, they're 305 floating discs with dual piston floating calipers. And if we go to the rear, this is a cast aluminium swinging arm here, and it's got a central suspension unit in there, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about specs and packages. It's got hydraulic preload, which is remotely adjustable. The rear travel on this is 219mm, again really sort of suggesting off-road capability or dual road capability, and travel is relevant. This has got a single disc at the rear, that's 265, and it's got a single piston floating caliper. In terms of the overall dimensions of the bike, this bike has got a wheelbase of 1593, so longer than some of the other bikes that I've covered, and BMW don't actually give the rake number on this. I tend to think in terms of rake, so for me, just consistency. Rake, by the way, is if you get a vertical from the spindle there up and measure the degree to the forks. This is, according to AD Adventure Pulse, website, that's a 28-degree rake. So all of those measurements suggest to me stability. Right, the BMW have a sort of a way of putting bundles of equipment levels together, and this one is quite well equipped. This bike is, I would say, quite fully loaded, and the retail price of it is £13,500. Well, the base bike is $10,750, and I'll just go through some of the permutations of this particular bike has to try and help you through what it's equipped with. This is what's called a GS trophy. That tells you that it's got this coloration, which I like. I bought the 1250 in the trophy styling, so the proof is in the pudding. I do really like it. It's got hand guards, and it's got what's called prep for navigation, the box on the top there, and I'll touch on that when I go through the instruments. This has also got the active package, which means that it's got heated grips. It's got in the riding mode, it's got the Pro on the Enduro. Again, I'll touch on that later. But it's also got this luggage rack where you can just suspend your panniers from, in this case here. It's also fitted with a comfort pack, which means that it's got a centre stand, which I always think is a good thing if you've got chain drive. This one's, and you get the M chain, which is a slightly heavier duty chain. You get keyless ignition with that, and a dynamic ESA, electronic suspension adjustment. BMW have a lot of acronyms. I think that's right, but you can always check me on a website. I won't be offended. It's also dynamic, which means it's got the LED lights, and with the 6-speed gearbox, it's got what they call Gear Shift Assistant Pro. And again, I'll talk about that when we actually go riding. The bike is also fitted, and I don't think it came in the packs, but this bike is fitted with cruise control and this higher screen. My GS 1250 has got a shorter screen on it, and although, again, I'll give you some feedback when I'm riding about wind noise on that, actually, on balance, I think I preferred that higher screen to the shorter version. Okay, let's talk about technology on the bike, and I think that sometimes a good place to have that conversation from is here at the front of the bike. This bike is fitted with the excellent 6.5-inch TFT. I think BMW led the way in the sort of clarity of instruments. Others have now got pretty close to it, but I don't think there's anybody who does it any better than BMW. And it is a little bit quirky because it's got this wheel over here, which some people took a little while to adjust to. In fact, I did, but now I'm used to it. I really like it because it's easy to control. So if you want to start looking and making changes on it, you use the button over here called the menu. You press that, and on the screen you can see that it's now gone into settings. So I then press again, get it to open, and then I'm starting to use the wheel to toggle across. I press it across, driving mode pre-selection, and this is a good example of the technology on it. You have various modes which you can choose. You can't run them all at once, so you just tick the ones that you want active, but you can see that I've not got Enduro Pro activated. If I turned one off like that, I could then turn that one on. So it is straightforward to do. You can do it on the go. Just to talk you through some of these, the Enduro and the Enduro Pro are really about off-road capabilities, as the word implies, and it's about the level, in the main, the level of traction control you get and whether you want the ABS operating or not. Pro definitely disables the rear ABS system, which off-road is a very useful characteristic. I like the systems. I find them clear and easy to use. As I touched on earlier, this is fitted with a sort of preparation for your satellite sat-nav navigation systems, and you can either get one from BMW, which you click in there, or in fairness you can buy a phone holder which then clips in quite securely and works well. I do use it regularly on my GS 1250. I use it with a phone, and it works really well and it integrates really well. It's a nice system. It's not such a great thing when you're trying to film on GoPro, because I did end up with some remarkably good pictures of this as we went along, and sadly you will be seeing some of those until I change the camera angle. I record normally with a camera hanging from here, but with this sort of angle it didn't work, so I did my Lulu impersonation and stuck one on the top, so you'll be seeing various angles as we ride. Okay, aesthetics and finish. Now obviously beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I actually like the look of the bike, and as always I do respect the build quality. You know, the gaps between the panels are always nice and even on a BMW, and the thing is nicely put together. This is the rally seat, which comes with this trophy, and that is actually quite a size, certainly for me. I really like the look of this seat. It's very similar to the one that I've got fitted to my 1250. My 1250's got lowered suspension and its height is just over 800 millimeters. We'll give you photographs comparing the two, because there are enormous amount of options available, and it's probably a good time to talk about it. In terms of seat height, you can actually go for low suspension on this bike, which takes 20 millimeters out of the strut stroke spring and gives you a seat height of 805. That includes a seat. You can actually just go for standard sort of chassis with an extra low seat, which is 825. You can go for a low seat, which is 835. You could go for a standard seat, which is 860. You could go for a high stroke comfort seat, which is 875. And if you wanted your head in the clouds, you can go for an extra high rally seat, which is 890. There's certainly lots of permutations on here. This bike, as I'll touch on during the GoPro, is a little bit high for me, but as I think I've just demonstrated, there's plenty of ways that you can tailor the bike to suit your own dimensions and make sure that you're comfortable and have the riding position that you want. In terms of cleaning and keeping it up together, some people, and I understand it, say, well, what's that got to do with anything? It's a bike which you can use off-road, just ride the thing and don't worry about it. I probably in the other camp, which is we like to use the bike for what it's designed for, but we like it to keep clean. And how easy it is to clean a bike is important to me. This one came up pretty well. I didn't manage to get it all off, as you can see, but it was relatively straightforward to try and get it back up to some sort of state, and it was okay to clean. I actually enjoyed cleaning it. These wheels are not my favourite, if I'm honest. These matte. I think they're anodized alloy, but correct me if I'm wrong. I won't be offended. But they do. You can scrub them as hard as you like. They dry and then they come back sort of quite dull. So I found it on my GS. It's been a job to keep that up together. So I love that look when it's clean, but it's quite a job to keep it clean. Overall, I think it's a nice looking bike, and as I said, I think it's going to be relatively easy to keep up together. Anyway, enough technical stuff. Let's go for a ride. You can now see what I mean about the sat-nav holder. I reposition the camera later. My first test for the bike was this bumpy, badly damaged and domed lane. I regularly ride it, and the two bikes that have coped with it best have been the new Suzuki DE800 and my 1250 GS. I am adding the 850 to this select list. This surface is a walk in the park for this bike. I am not going to attempt it, and nor am I advocating it, but I would be surprised if it couldn't do 3 digits along here and still remain on the grey bit. It's a very capable bike. I've actually done quite a bit of off-roading, including enduros, which I started in my 20s. I was only at clubman level, and normally half of them were faster than me, and the other half not. I did return to it briefly in my 40s, to find that whilst my brain wanted to do it all at the same speed, my body, somewhat unhelpfully, said, "I'll be with you in a minute." Needless to say, I fell off a lot more in my 40s than I did in my 20s, and funnily enough, I haven't been tempted to return. I don't bounce nor indeed recover like I used to. The only reason I mention this is to support my next comment. The F850 GS feels like a bike that could be genuinely ridden off-road. Not a full-on enduro, which normally requires very specialist bikes, but certainly proper off-road terrain and not just a gravel drive. But back to the road. The first day's riding was windy and a bit damp. The bike is, as I thought it would be, very stable and was certainly untroubled by the occasionally strong gusts. They were actually more trouble when I was stationary. The bike in this specification is actually a couple of inches too tall for me, so teetering in the wind made an adventure of it. The bike is running in, so I was limited in my revs, but it still felt responsive. Bedded in, I'm sure it will go well. 95 brake horsepower and 92 newton meters of torque are pretty respectable numbers. The front fork travel on the conventional, if upside down forks, is far more noticeable on this bike than my telelever equipped GS, which acts in a way like an anti-dive system. It is, however, no different from bikes with similar equipment that I have ridden. It is very different to a GS, and you do need to adjust your braking accordingly. Instantly familiar with the controls, I was looking forward to riding this bike further. The weather and the camera angle changed the next day. It looks brighter here than it actually was, and the roads were initially not my favourite, some wet, some dry. Riding a new bike in the wet with tyres I'm not familiar with, on roads I don't know, is always a bit tentative for me. YouTube data, Big Brother is watching you, suggests that most of you are, well actually 54%, between 45 and 64 years old. Some of you, like me, will remember the mostly Japanese tyres of the 1970s. They of course lasted for forever, or until it rained and you fell off. Not surprisingly, some of us are still initially cautious of wet weather grip. Most modern tyres are, in comparative terms, fantastic in the wet, but the trouble with this sentence is the word most. I have several bikes that are equally secure, wet or dry, and I trust them. But I have had a couple of new bikes where the original OE supplied tyres have ended up in the skip very quickly. Fine in the dry, they were alarming in these conditions. My question for this bike was, are the factory supplied Michelin Anarchies happy with the cold, wet and damaged roads? I needn't have worried. They were fine for my riding style, and by the end of the day, normal progress, occasionally brisk but not fast, was resumed. The weather opted for the full wet mode, and I took the opportunity to adjust the settings on the bike accordingly. I don't always do this, but it felt like a great opportunity to do so. It was really very wet. I changed the mode to rain. You can do this on the go by pressing the mode button on the right hand handlebar until you see the option you want on the screen, and then close the throttle. Opening the throttle activates the setting. It softens the power delivery. I also took the opportunity to soften the suspension to road rather than dynamic by pressing the button on the left hand side. In these conditions, softer settings are for me more comfortable, and it was useful to be able to do it on the road. Alan was acting as route master for the day, and I think a couple of occasions he wondered what on earth I was doing. The answer, Alan, was faffing about with buttons. I like the bigger windshield on the bike, and it did help you and save you from some buffeting, but as you can hear on the audio, it did play some interesting tunes with the wind. I tried it in both positions and it still managed to get a tune out of it. I liked the gearbox and thought the gear shift assist did a good job. It's easy to change, clutchless up and down, and I actually found it better than the same system on my 1250, where it's good up from third onwards, but not always so cooperative coming down. Neither system is as slick or as smooth as some of the quick shifter systems out there. Indeed, Suzuki's are, in my opinion, particularly good, but of the two, I preferred the 850 to the 1250. Riding through Banbury, if you ever feel the need to ride a Cockhorse to Banbury Cross, this is the cross, was easy. The bike is very balanced at low speeds, and clutch, which is cable, oblique, mechanically operated rather than hydraulic, easy to feather. The bike weighs 229 kilograms, which is 20 kilograms less than my 1250. The weight is higher up, but it definitely feels lighter. If town work is a regular part of your requirements, this bike is, in my view, fine. Having got completely soaked, home and hot water beckoned. Trusting the tyres, chassis and gentle power delivery, I was happy making my way back through the rain. The 21-inch front wheel and long wheelbase does give a slightly more detached feeling than most bikes I ride, but I suspect if I was riding it regularly, I would soon get used to it. I did like the very direct feel of the throttle, chassis and chain. It felt very controlled, great in low grip conditions. Riding 153 miles in the rain is not always fun, but once I got used to the bike, it certainly was today. So, 227 miles later, what did I think? Well, as a road bike, I love the gearbox. I think it's got a good spread of power and torque, despite the fact that I was running it in. I found it very comfortable. I think this is a bike you could ride around the Highlands of Scotland and really enjoy. It's light and manoeuvrable. It's got great electronics. And frankly, it's £4,000 cheaper than the 1250 in equivalent spec. It's good value. But I think that's only half the story. This bike is off-road ready. I've had a BMW GS in my garage of one type or another for 18 years, and I'll be honest, despite the fact I have done some off-roading, I've never once walked into the garage and thought, I've got a good idea, let's go and get that stuck in the mud. A few of my friends go to Salisbury Plain, about 50 miles away, where it's got some nice open trails and tracks. They get there by riding on the road and going down some varying degrees of difficulty green lanes, as we call them here in the UK. If they said to me, you've really got to come out with us, I'll be honest, if I had a choice between taking my R1250 GS or this 850 GS, I'd pick this one every time. I hope that you've enjoyed the video and that you found it interesting and potentially useful. If you did, you might be kind enough to press like or subscribe. But as always, I'm pretty relaxed about that. What's most important is that you ride safe and that you stay well.